Welcome back, my friend. The lamps are lit, the wind has quieted, and somewhere in the shadows the Niffler has found something shiny again. But this time, it's not gold. It's a story, and tonight, he's ready to share it with you. So settle in and listen closely. It begins like this.
The Southern Cross hung low and heavy over the ocean, like 4 diamond nails driven into the velvet canvas of the sky to keep the night from falling. Here, on the coast of the North Island of New Zealand, in a place Muggles called simply the Bay, whilst local iwi wizards knew it as Te Waiarongo, waters of peace, a symphony usually reigned. It was not merely the music of nature, but a complex, polyphonic interweaving of magic and life. Usually, one could hear the rhythmic rumble of the tide crashing against black volcanic rocks, the thin whistle of wind in the Harakeg Flats, and of course, the famous underwater singing of the silver sirens, whose voices rose from the depths like bubbles of air to burst upon the surface with a fine, crystal chime. It is said that even the moonlight here possessed its own sound, a low, vibrating hum that could only be heard by stopping one's ears. But tonight, the world had been struck dumb. Luna Lovegood stood at the edge of a sheer cliff, wrapped in her favorite robes the color of a storm cloud, which had the property of subtly shifting hue depending on the wearer's mood. At present, the robes were dark gray, almost black, with rare flecks of an anxious violet. The wind ruffled her pale blonde hair, which was now cut somewhat shorter than in her school days, and gathered into a messy bun, secured not with a wand, but with a bone hairpin, gifted by a shaman from Patagonia. She was 26 years old. She was no longer the girl who tucked her wand behind her ear, and believed everything her father wrote without question. Years of travel, hundreds of expeditions to the farthest corners of the world, encounters with creatures most wizards would prefer not to know existed, had hardened her. She had learned to distinguish shades of danger, learned to be firm when necessary, yet she had kept what made her unique, the ability to see the world not as it is, but as it could be. Luna took a deep breath, letting the cold, salty air fill her lungs. It smelled of iodine, wet stone, and something strange, something sterile. It was the smell of a hospital after a thorough cleaning, when the scent of sickness has been destroyed, but the scent of life has vanished along with it. The silence was wrong. It was not the peaceful silence that settles after sunset when the world goes to sleep. It was a tense silence, pulled tight as a string before it snaps. The ocean below did not roar. The waves rolled onto the shore softly, oilily, without their characteristic crash, as if the water had lost its striking power. Birds did not cry. Even the cicadas in the grass had fallen silent, as if afraid that any sound might attract the attention of something terrible. "You feel it too, don't you?" Luna whispered, addressing not anyone in particular but the space around her. On her shoulder stirred a small creature resembling a dry leaf, a bowtruckle named Barnaby, whom she had rescued from a sawmill in Germany. Barnaby shivered and hid deeper in the folds of her robes. He always sensed the emotional background more keenly than any dark detector. His trembling confirmed Luna's guess. This place was not simply sleeping. It was holding its breath in fear. Luna retrieved a letter from her pocket, received 3 days prior. The parchment was coarse, made from fern fibers, and the ink shimmered, as if pearl dust had been dissolved within it. The elder of the local magical community, a woman named Aroha, had written briefly and alarmingly, "The Silver Reef has fallen silent, Miss Lovegood. The sirens have not sung for a week, The water has grown heavy. Our strongest healers say the reef is dying, but they cannot see the cause. Nature does not die so quietly. It usually fights. Please come. You know how to listen to that which does not sound. Luna tucked the letter away and began her descent down the path to the water. The trail was narrow, winding, hewn directly into the limestone rock centuries ago. Small pebbles crunched beneath the soles of her sturdy dragonhide boots, a practical gift from Harry last Christmas. When she reached the sandy beach, the sense of wrongness intensified. The sand here was black, volcanic, and usually retained the sun's warmth long after dusk, but today it was cold, almost icy. Luna drew her wand but did not light it. Darkness was her ally. It allowed her eyes to tune into subtler matters. She walked along the tide line, peering intently at the strip of wet seaweed cast up by the ocean. Usually one could find the tracks of nocturnal moonwalker crabs here, coming ashore to dance in the starlight. But the sand was smooth and untouched. Not a single track. Not a single burrow. Luna stopped and crouched. She closed her eyes and placed her palms on the damp sand. She used no spells. In magizoology, empathy was often the most important tool. She tried to feel the earth. Usually the earth vibrates, a collection of thousands of microscopic movements. Roots growing, insects moving, underground waters flowing. But now, the ground beneath her palms felt like a slab of concrete, deaf, closed off. They haven't left, she whispered, opening her eyes, her gaze, large and misty with thought, fixed upon the black water. They are hiding, all together, at once. What could force an entire ecosystem, from microscopic plankton to mighty sirens, to hide simultaneously? A predator? Perhaps. But a predator causes panic, chaos, flight. This felt like voluntary paralysis. She moved on, and suddenly something caught her attention. A faint, barely noticeable glint in the dark. It was not magical light, but rather the reflection of stars on something pearlescent. Luna stepped closer. Lying on the black sand was a shell. It was the shell of a power mollusk, a local variety of abalone, known for its incredible iridescence of blue, green, and purple. But this shell was enormous, the size of a large tureen, and strangest of all, it lay upturned, exposing its pearly interior. Luna reached out cautiously but did not touch it. The air around the shell was vibrating. It was similar to the sensation of bringing one's hand near an old television screen, a static tension that made the hairs on one's skin stand on end. "You're afraid too?" Luna asked quietly. Slowly, millimeter by millimeter, she brought her finger closer to the rim of the shell. The moment her skin touched the cold mother of pearl, the shell emitted a sound. It was not a knock or a scrape. It was a quiet, high-pitched whine like the whimpering of a beaten dog, only on the verge of ultrasound. The sound was so pitiful and piercing that Luna involuntarily snatched her hand back. Barnaby on her shoulder clutched at her ear with his little twig fingers and hissed. "I'm sorry," Luna whispered. "I didn't mean to hurt you." She understood one important thing. This shell was not empty. The magical imprint of the creature that had lived in it still remained inside, and this imprint was broadcasting a single emotion. Terror. Absolute, paralyzing terror that makes one forget how to breathe. Luna straightened up and looked along the shore. About 300 meters away, In a small cove protected by rocks, she saw a light. It was not the soft, natural light she loved, but a harsh, white, geometrically perfect glow of a magical lantern. Someone was here. Someone who wasn't afraid to disturb this fragile silence. Someone who had come here not to listen, but to look. She adjusted the bag on her shoulder, checked that Barnaby was holding on tight, and headed towards the light. Her steps were soundless, a habit developed over years of observing skittish creatures. As she approached, she began to make out the details of the camp, and the sight made the corners of her mouth droop ever so slightly. It was a perfect camp. Too perfect. The magical tent was pitched with mathematical precision, the pegs driven in at exact angles. A protective circle was drawn around the tent, glowing with a faint blue light. The standard, ministry-approved protective formula, no fall. Nearby stood several folding tables, cluttered with instruments. Luna saw copper scales, glass flasks containing liquids of various colors, intricate mechanisms with lenses that rotated on their own, and long scrolls of parchment weighed down by stones to prevent the wind from carrying them off. It resembled not the camp of a naturalist, but the field laboratory of an alchemist. A man was pacing between the tables. He was tall and lean, with dark hair already beginning to gray at the temples, though he looked no more than 30. He wore a thick woolen waistcoat over a shirt with rolled-up sleeves and trousers, with a multitude of pockets, from which tools protruded. He moved sharply, precisely, without wasted motion. The man held a long glass pipette and was drawing water from a large bucket, evidently just fetched from the ocean. He dripped the water onto the lens of one of the instruments, squinted into it, and began to write something rapidly in a notebook, muttering under his breath. Toxicity levels within normal range. His muttering drifted to Luna. His voice was low, slightly raspy and very tired. Magical background stable. Deviation 0. 3%. Impossible. It's simply impossible. Luna stopped at the edge of the circle of light. She didn't want to frighten him, but in such silence, any appearance would be a surprise. You know, water doesn't like being measured with iron rulers, she said in her usual dreamy voice, sounding as if she were discussing the weather over a cup of tea. The man started so violently that the pipette slipped from his fingers, hit the table, and shattered with a crisp, brittle sound. He spun around instantly, drawing his wand. The movement was practiced, swift, almost reflexive. A threatening red light flared at the tip of his wand, but extinguished a moment later when he saw who stood before him. He blinked, staring in confusion at the girl with large eyes, her hair tangled by the night wind, and the small green creature peeking out from behind her collar. You? He lowered his wand but did not stow it away. You snuck up. That's dangerous. This is a quarantine zone. I didn't sneak up, Luna objected calmly, stepping closer to the light. I just walked the way nature walks. It doesn't stomp its boots unless it's angry, and I'm not angry. I'm Luna. The man frowned, his dark eyebrows meeting at the bridge of his nose, giving his face an expression of deep concentration. Lovegood? He asked, a note of recognition mixed with disbelief in his voice. Luna Lovegood? The one who writes articles about... He paused, choosing his words, evidently trying to be polite. Alternative zoology for the quibbler. And for Transfiguration today, when they aren't afraid to print the truth. Luna added with a slight smile. And you must be Scamander. Rolf Scamander. You have your grandfather's eyes. though he looks at the world more softly. You look as if you want to take the world apart into screws to understand how it works. Rolf straightened, trying to regain his professional distance. He dusted off his hands from invisible dust and nodded at his instruments. I don't take the world apart, Miss Lovegood. I analyze it. Those are different things. And yes, I am Rolf Scamander, Chief Consultant for the Department of Magical Ecology at the ICW. I was sent here a week ago to determine the cause of the anomaly. Anomaly, Luna repeated, tasting the word. A strange word for silence. Have you found the cause? Rolf sighed heavily, and in that sound, the fatigue he tried to hide behind a mask of professionalism broke through. He ran a hand through his hair, ruffling it even further. No. And it's driving me mad. I've run a full spectral analysis of the water. Nothing. No traces of dark magic, curses, poisons, or invasive species of algae. I checked dragon migration routes. Clear. I even hypothesized it might be seasonal hibernation caused by shifting magnetic fields, but sirens don't sleep at this time of year. They are supposed to sing. Their singing is essential for the life cycle of the plankton. Without the song, the chain breaks. The reef is dying, Lovegood. By my calculations, we have 5 days before the process becomes irreversible. He spoke quickly, clearly, wielding facts like bricks, building a wall of logic. But Luna saw the confusion behind that wall. You are looking for a disease, she said quietly, approaching the table and examining a complex brass mechanism that ticked softly, measuring, it seemed, the density of the ether. But this isn't a disease of the body. And what is it, in your opinion? Rolf crossed his arms skeptically. Did Nargles steal their voices? Or perhaps Raxperts clouded their minds? I've read your theories, Miss Lovegood. They are fascinating. But we need science here, not fairy tales. Barnaby on Luna's shoulder squeaked offensively and stuck his tongue out at Rolf, which was not easy for a creature resembling a twig. Luna stroked him with a finger, soothing him. Science is just one way of asking the world questions, Rolf, she said, without a shadow of offense. But sometimes the world answers in a language for which no formulas have yet been invented. She slowly withdrew the power shell she had found from the wide pocket of her robes. In the harsh light of the magical lantern, the mother of pearl flashed with a cold, unsettling glint. Here. She held the shell out to him. Take it, but be careful. It is still screaming. Rolf looked at the shell, then at Luna. His gaze was full of doubt, but professional curiosity won out. He took a pair of dragonhide protective gloves from his pocket, put them on, and only then took the shell. He began to examine it from all sides, held it up to the light, even tapped it with his wand, muttering a diagnostic spell. Revelio Bioformus, he pronounced. A beam erupted from the tip of the wand, enveloping the shell, but instead of showing structure or chemical composition, the light trembled and scattered into sparks. Rolf frowned. Strange. Structure intact. Calcium. Aragonite. Ordinary exoskeleton of a Haliotis iris. Empty. Dead. Don't look at it. Luna stopped him gently. You are trying to read it like a book. But you need to listen to it like music. Take off the glove, Rolf. That violates safety protocol. He replied automatically. We don't know if there are contact toxins on the surface. There are no toxins there. Only fear. Fear isn't transmitted through touch unless you let it in yourself. Rolf hesitated. He looked at this strange girl, standing in the middle of his perfectly organized camp, amidst the chaos of the natural night, saying things that contradicted everything he had been taught at the Academy of Magizoology. But he was also a Scamander, and Scamanders, for all their love of classification, always had one weakness. They wanted to know the truth, however strange it might be. Slowly, finger by finger, he pulled off his right glove. His hand was handsome, with long fingers covered in tiny scars from bites and scratches, the marks of his profession. He touched the smooth inner side of the shell with a bare finger. At first, nothing happened, and then his eyes widened. He inhaled sharply, as if he had been punched in the gut. The shell didn't sting him, didn't burn. It transmitted an impulse. It was like touching an exposed nerve. A high, piercing squeal rang out in his head, not in his ears, but directly in his brain. It was the sound of pure, undiluted panic. He felt the cold darkness, the pressure of water that had suddenly turned hostile, and the sensation of something enormous advancing, consuming everything in its path. Rolf dropped the shell. Luna, anticipating this, deftly caught it in mid-air before it hit the sand. He stepped back, breathing heavily, staring at his fingers as if they had betrayed him. What was that?" he whispered. His voice had lost all its confidence. "Is it a mental attack?" "It's a memory," said Luna, carefully wrapping the shell in a handkerchief and tucking it back into her pocket. The last thing this mollusk felt before leaving its home and allowing the waves to cast it ashore. It didn't die of disease, Rolf. It fled. They all fled or hid. The sirens aren't singing because they are frozen in terror. Rolf ran a hand over his face, trying to shake off the remnants of someone else's fear. He walked to the table, took a glass of water, and drank it in one gulp. Then he turned to Luna. He looked at her differently now. Without condescension, with wariness, but also with interest. "All right," he said. "Let's assume you're right. It's fear. Mass ecosystem psychosis. But what could frighten the strongest creatures of this coast? Sirens aren't skittish fish. They can drown a shark with a single sonic blast." "Something that doesn't obey their rules," Luna replied. She walked to the edge of the lit circle and gazed into the darkness of the ocean. "Something very old and very lonely. I felt it when I touched the sand. Down there, something has awakened that has slept for a long time. And it isn't evil, Rolf. It is just too loud in its silence." Loud in silence. Rolf shook his head but no longer argued. He began quickly gathering instruments into a bag. "If the source is down there, my surface tests will yield nothing. We need to go down." "Go down?" asked Luna. "At night?" "The best time." Rolf suddenly livened up. In his eyes appeared the same glint Luna had seen in old photographs of Newt Scamander. The glint of an explorer who has caught the scent of a mystery. Bioluminescence is at its maximum at night. If there are changes in the magical spectrum, we'll see them better. I have a modified shell bathyscaphe. Grandfather drafted the blueprints. I refined them. It camouflages itself as marine life. He glanced at Luna, assessing. "Can you swim underwater with a bubblehead charm?" "I can," nodded Luna, "but the bubble distorts sounds, and I need to hear. The bathyscaphe has acoustic membranes. You'll hear everything, even a shrimp sneezing." Rolf smiled faintly for the first time that evening. It was a crooked, slightly awkward smile, but it made his face surprisingly pleasant. So, Lovegood, are you ready to test your theories at a depth of 100 meters? Luna looked at him, then at the ocean. The fear she had felt through the shell hadn't gone anywhere, it still hung in the air. But now there was someone nearby who had a plan. Even if that plan consisted of metal, magic, and stubbornness, it was better than nothing. I am ready, she said simply, but Barnaby stays here. He doesn't like dampness. Sensible, nodded Rolf. Then to work. We have little time if your feelings about the escape are correct. Nature abhors a vacuum. If the sirens are silent, someone else will soon come to take their place. And we might not like this someone. He waved his wand, and a large trunk in the corner of the camp sprang open. Parts began to fly out, assembling themselves into a strange structure resembling a giant silver turtle. Luna watched this, and a thought crossed her mind. Perhaps the combination of her intuition and his technology was exactly what this wounded place needed. She stroked Barnaby, placed him on the branch of the nearest Pohutakawa tree, and whispered, "Wait for us. We will try to bring the song back." The silver turtle, as Rolf called his bathyscaphe, though to Luna it resembled more a giant, carefully polished tea strainer, was a marvel of magi engineering. It hung above the water, suspended by levitation charms, its smooth metallic sides reflecting the starry sky, creating the illusion that it was not a machine, but a drop of mercury, ready to return to the ocean. Inside it smelled of old leather, machine oil, and peppermint. Evidently, Rolf chewed peppermint humbugs when he was nervous. The space was cramped, designed for exactly 2 wizards and a heap of equipment. The walls were thickly covered with copper pipes, pressure gauges, dials with nervously twitching hands, and glass spheres in which miniature models of sea currents floated. "Sit here," Rolf commanded, pointing to a chair upholstered in red velvet that looked as if it had been stolen from a Victorian drawing room. "And touch nothing. Especially that lever. That's the emergency ascent. If you yank it, we'll be ejected to the surface at the speed of a cannonball, and we'll turn into jelly from the pressure change." "I like jelly," Luna remarked thoughtfully, settling into the chair and arranging her robes. "But I wouldn't want to become it. I promise I shall be a polite guest." Rolf sat in the adjacent chair, in front of which a complex control panel was deployed. He waved his wand quickly over the panel, and dozens of tiny lights flashed green. "Hull pressurization," he muttered. "Gill filters activation. Hydro engine start. Are you ready, Lovegood?" "As never before," she replied, gazing into the large round porthole in front of her. Rolf pressed a button, and the bathyscaphe swayed gently. The levitation charms dissipated, and the machine fell downwards. The impact with the water was surprisingly soft. A splash, a moment of white foam beyond the glass, and they were submerged. The world outside the porthole changed instantly. The black sky vanished, replaced by the thick, inky darkness of the water. The bathyscaphe began its descent, and Luna felt her stomach give a slight lurch towards her throat. For the first few minutes they were silent. Rolf was busy with the instruments. He was constantly tweaking valves, checking depth gauge readings, and whispering something while tracing his finger along a map of the seabed that glowed with magical light on a small table. Luna simply watched. The deeper they sank, the more the light changed. At first it was absolute darkness, but then, the ocean began to wake up. Schools of small fish swam past the glass. glowing with a pale blue light. Jellyfish, looking like lacy umbrellas, pulsed with pink and violet, leaving trails of light behind them. Depth 50 meters, Rolf reported dryly. Pressure rising, hull holding steady. We are approaching the outer ring of the reef. It is very quiet here, Luna observed. Even for the underwater world, the acoustic membranes are working at full power. Rolf tapped a copper trumpet, sticking out of the wall near his ear. They should be picking up every sound and transmitting it to us. But you are right. The ether is clean. Too clean. Usually there is a hum here, the clicking of shrimp, the songs of whales, the grinding of stones. And now, it's like a crypt. Luna leaned towards the porthole, pressing her nose against the cold glass. Turn on the external lights, Rolf. Please. Rolf flicked a toggle switch. 2 powerful beams of light erupted from the eyes of the silver turtle, slicing through the water column. And what they snatched from the darkness made them both hold their breath. They had reached the Silver Reef. It was a place of legendary beauty, about which Luna had read in textbooks. The corals here did not grow chaotically, but formed strange, almost architectural structures, tall spires, arches, colonnades. And they all possessed a silvery, pearlescent hue that should have shone with its own light. But now the reef was grey. The corals looked as if they had been sprinkled with ash. They had not died. Luna could see their polyps moving faintly in the current, but they had lost their color. Bleaching, Rolf commented, and notes of a doctor giving a grim diagnosis appeared in his voice. It's a stress reaction. Usually happens when the water temperature rises, but the sensors show normal levels. They aren't bleached from heat, Luna whispered. They have turned gray. From terror. Do you see how the anemones are clenched? They are closed. Every single one. The bathyscaphe floated slowly over the dead landscape. It resembled a flight over an abandoned ghost town. Not a single fish, not a single crab. Only endless rows of grey coral towers. We are approaching the Siren colony, said Rolf, checking the map. Coordinates point to the central plaza of the reef. Get ready. If they are aggressive. They aren't aggressive, Luna interrupted him. They are silver sirens, Rolf. They are pacifists. They eat algae and sing to the moon. They even drive away sharks with lullabies, not spears. Fear changes everyone, Rolf replied gloomily, but he slowed the bathyscaphe down nonetheless. The machine rounded a tall rock covered in sponges, and the central plaza of the reef opened up before them, a wide amphitheater created by nature itself. And there they saw them. The sight was so surreal that for a moment Luna forgot how to breathe. Dozens, perhaps hundreds of sirens hung in the water. They did not look like the sirens from the Black Lake at Hogwarts. They had no grey skin or yellow eyes. The silver sirens were beautiful, with skin resembling polished moonstone, with long hair floating around them like clouds of ink, and tails covered in scales that shimmered with all shades of indigo. But right now they were not moving. They hung in the water in unnatural poses. Some were curled up in a ball, hugging themselves. Others were stretched taut as a string, heads thrown back as if in a silent scream. Some held hands with others, forming chains. Their eyes were open, but they looked at nothing. The gills on their necks fluttered barely noticeably, the only sign that they were alive. Catatonic stupor, whispered Rolf, and his voice sounded too loud in the silence of the cabin. He quickly began flicking switches, aiming various sensors at the nearest siren. Heart rate slowed to 3 beats per minute. Brain activity minimal. It's as if they have switched themselves off. No, objected Luna, pressing against the glass. She looked into the eyes of the nearest siren, a young female, clutching something that looked like a harp made of fish bones to her chest. They haven't switched themselves off. They are listening. Listening to what? There is total silence here. Exactly. They are listening to the silence. It is so loud that it has hypnotized them. Look at their positioning, Rolf. It isn't chaos. They are all turned the same way. Rolf looked up from the instruments and looked out the window. Indeed, all the sirens' bodies, regardless of posture, were oriented with their heads or torsos in one direction. To the northwest, where the reef floor dropped sharply into a black abyss. Vector of attention, he muttered. You are right. They are all looking at the Maui Trench. But there is nothing there except depth, and a few underwater geysers. The source is there, said Luna confidently. We need to go there. Rolf hesitated. Lovegood, that is dangerous. If whatever is down there could paralyze 100 sirens, what will it do to us? My protection is designed for physical and magical attacks, but mental ones. We have no choice. Luna said softly. Look at them. They aren't sleeping. They are waiting. If we don't remove the source of fear, they will simply forget how to breathe. Rolf looked at the frozen siren with the harp. Then at his instruments, which showed only cold numbers. He sighed, took another peppermint humbug from his pocket, and popped it into his mouth. All right. Course set for the Maui Trench. But I am activating the Anahinanafai Hedgehog Protocol. What is that? She inquired. That is when the hull of the bathyscaphe charges with electricity sufficient to stun a kraken. Just in case. Just don't electrocute the sirens, she asked. I'll try, he grunted and turned the wheel. The silver turtle slowly turned around and swam past the frozen inhabitants of the sea, heading towards the edge of the abyss, from which blew a cold and a darkness thicker than night. The Maui Trench met them not with darkness as Rolf had expected, but with light. However, it was a light that made one want to screw one's eyes shut. The walls of the underwater canyon were carpeted with phosphorescent mosses and sponges that pulsed with a sickly yellowish-green color. It resembled the color of an old bruise or rotting wood. The silver turtle sank slowly along the sheer cliff face. The depth gauge read 120 meters. The hull of the bathyscaphe began to emit quiet rhythmic sounds, the metal compressing under the pressure of the water, like an old house groaning in the wind. Water temperature dropping, Rolf commented, eyes glued to the panel, his fingers nervously fiddled with the adjustment knobs. 4 degrees. 3. This is anomalous for this latitude. There should be a warm current here. The warmth has gone, Luna said quietly. She sat with her legs tucked under her in the armchair, looking not at the instruments, but out the window. Have you noticed, Rolf? The light has changed. Bioluminescence, he nodded. Chemical reaction of luciferin. No, I mean the emotion of the light. Up above, on the reef, it was silver and calm. But here, it is nervous. It trembles. Rolf wanted to object that light has no emotions, but he held his tongue. He remembered the shell on the shore and the terror it had broadcast. Here in the depths, that sensation became almost physical. The air in the cabin felt thick, heavy. Suddenly, the bathyscaphe lurched. It didn't feel like a current, it was a blow. What was that? Rolf instantly reached for the spotlight control lever, swinging them towards the impact. The beam of light snatched something long, flexible and translucent from the darkness. It writhed like a ribbon of mist, yet possessed the density of flesh. Giant nematode. Rolf hypothesized, the scientist's excitement waking in his voice. No, too large, it looks like a tentacle. Another blow, stronger this time, shook the turtle. A metallic screech rang out above their heads. Something had grabbed the bathyscaphe from above. "We are under attack!" Rolf shouted. He yanked the wheel, trying to break free, but the machine didn't budge. The engine roared, the propellers churning the water into foam, but the turtle hung suspended, as if glued to the rock. In the porthole it appeared. It was not a kraken. It was a gigantic sea anemone, terrible in its beauty. Actinia gargantua, as Rolf might have named it, had he time for classification. Its body resembled the swollen bud of a giant flower, glowing with a venomous violet light. Hundreds of tentacles, each as thick as a grown man's leg, wrapped around the bathyscaphe's hull, obscuring the view. "She's blocking the engines!" Rolf was pale, but acted with precision. His hand reached for a large red button under a glass cover. "I am activating the Hedgehog Protocol. An electric discharge of 50,000 volts. That will force her to let go." "No!" Luna grabbed his wrist. Her grip was unexpectedly strong. "Lovegood, let go! She will crush the hull. Pressure is already critical. She isn't trying to eat us, Rolf. Look at the suckers." Luna pointed with her free hand at the glass, where one of the tentacles had attached itself. "She isn't releasing stingers. She isn't secreting acid. She is holding us like a child holds a toy," Rolf shouted, trying to wrench his hand free. "And children often break their toys. She is scared." Luna's voice became firm, almost commanding. For the first time she looked at Rolf not as a quirky scientist, but as a person making a mistake. "There is something here in the dark, something terrible, and we are the only source of heat and light. She is just trying to hide behind us. If you shock her, she will contract from the pain and crush us reflexively." Rolf froze. His hand hovered over the red button. He looked at the hull pressure gauge. The needle was in the red zone but wasn't moving further. The anemone really was just holding them. Tightly, desperately, but not aggressively. "What do you propose?" he croaked. "We can't hang here forever. We have enough air for 3 hours." "Give me access to the external speaker," said Luna. "The acoustic cannon? It's tuned to repel sharks with ultrasound." "Number just the speaker. I want to talk." Rolf looked at her as if she were mad. But it was a stalemate. An electric shock really could trigger a spasm that would destroy them. "Fine," he flicked a switch. "Channel open. But you have 30 seconds before the hull begins to deform." Luna closed her eyes. She didn't speak with words. Human language meant nothing to a creature that had lived here for millions of years. She began to hum. It was a low, vibrating sound that originated somewhere in her chest. It resembled the purring of a giant cat or the hum of a transformer box. Luna was trying to imitate the sound she had heard on the first day. The sound of the reef itself before it fell silent. The sound of stability. The sound of peace. Rolf watched her with a mixture of skepticism and fear. He saw the speaker membrane on the panel vibrating. Seconds dragged on painfully slowly. The screech of metal did not stop. And then, a miracle happened. The violet light of the anemone began to change. The poisonous hue began to lighten, shifting into a soft lavender. The tentacle pressed against the porthole relaxed slightly. Luna changed the pitch. She added high notes to the low hum, mimicking the sound of a current. The anemone shuddered with its entire body. Slowly, very slowly, it began to loosen its embrace. One tentacle fell away from the hull. Then a second. "Engines free," whispered Rolf, not believing his eyes. "Just slowly," whispered Luna, not opening her eyes and continuing to hum. "Make no sudden movements, do not flee, just drift away." Rolf nodded, though she couldn't see it. He touched the levers with the tenderness of a pianist. The silver turtle began to move away from the rock, inch by inch. The anemone did not pursue them. It remained hanging on the rock, swaying its tentacles in time with the sound that still poured from the bathyscaphe speakers, until they had retreated to a safe distance. When the danger had passed, Luna fell silent and opened her eyes. She looked tired. Beads of sweat had appeared on her forehead. "You," Rolf began, but his voice cracked. He cleared his throat. "You just soothed a Cnidaria giganta with a lullaby." "It wasn't a lullaby." Luna smiled, with the corner of her mouth. "I just told her that we aren't going away, that she isn't alone in the dark." Rolf leaned back in his chair and looked at Luna with a long, studying gaze. The last drop of condescension had vanished from his look. In its place appeared something new. Respect. And, perhaps, a little envy for how easily she understood a world that was, to him, merely a set of data. "We are approaching the canyon floor," he said, turning back to the instruments, but his tone had softened. "Depth, 200 meters. And it seems we have found what we were looking for." Luna pressed herself against the glass again. Below, at the very bottom of the Maui Trench, where there should have been only rock and silt, stood a structure. Or what looked like a structure. It was a gigantic arch formed from the intertwined bones of ancient whales and fossilized coral. It resembled the entrance to a cathedral, but strangest of all was that the entrance to the cave behind the arch was blocked. It was covered by some substance, like frozen smoke or cloudy glass. It did not glow. On the contrary, it absorbed the light of the bathyscaphe spotlights. The beams simply hit it and vanished, reflecting nothing. "That isn't stone," said Rolf, checking the sensors. "And it isn't organic. It is a magical barrier. But it isn't artificial. It's natural." "It is silence," whispered Luna. "It is the physical embodiment of silence. It has become so thick it has turned into a wall." "Materialized sound?" "Or rather, the lack thereof." Rolf frowned. "Theoretically possible under colossal magical pressure. But what could generate such pressure?" "Whatever is sitting inside," replied Luna. She felt it again. the same cold as from the shell on the shore, but multiplied by 1,000. From the cave, through the cloudy wall of silence, seeped a wave of longing so powerful it made Luna's heart ache. "We need to go inside, Rolf." "Through that." Rolf pointed at the grey veil. "If that is vacuum matter, it will crush the bathyscaphe like an eggshell. Matter without sound destroys the molecular bonds of metal." "Then we shall have to go out," said Luna calmly. Rolf froze. "Go out? At a depth of 200 meters? Have you lost your mind? The pressure will crush us faster than we can say Quidditch." "Your bobblehead charms can withstand pressure if modified correctly," she countered. "I read your articles in the Magizoology Gazette. You developed the Protego Abysso spell for deep-sea exploration." "That is an experimental spell. I only tested it on dummies." "Well, I am not a dummy, but I learn quickly." Luna began to unbuckle her safety straps. "Rolf, the bathyscaphe won't make it through there. It is too loud. Its engines, its mechanisms. They are noise. And this wall reacts to noise. It will destroy anything that sounds. We need to be quiet. We need to become part of the water." Rolf looked at her, a fierce battle raging in his head. Logic screamed, "No." Manuals screamed, "No." But intuition, the very thing he had so diligently suppressed, whispered that she was right. "If we die," he said, slowly standing up and beginning to prepare the airlock chamber, "I shall return as a ghost and write a scathing article about your methods, Lovegood." "Agreed," Luna nodded seriously. "But I think we will survive. Being a ghost is boring. There is no taste to pudding there." Rolf shook his head, hiding a smile, and began to cast complex, multi-layered charms upon them, which were to be their only protection against the millions of tons of water hanging above their heads. The airlock of the Silver Turtle was the size of a broom cupboard, and as water began to fill it, Luna felt the space around her contract becoming claustrophobic. Here, at a depth of 200 meters, the water did not pour in. It burst in under furious pressure, hissing like molten lead. "Remember," Rolf's voice sounded strangled through the magical intercom built into the collar of his dragonhide protective suit. He stood opposite her, and his face in the dim red glow of the emergency lamp looked pale as chalk. "Protego Abysso is not merely a bubble of air, it is a force field. It takes the water pressure and redistributes it around your body. You will feel compression. That is normal. The main thing is not to panic and not to try to breathe too deeply." "I shall breathe as a fish breathes," replied Luna, closing her eyes. Slowly and with gratitude. The water reached their necks. It was freezing. Despite the thermoregulating charms on their suits, this cold penetrated deeper than the skin. It touched the bones. "Protego Abysso," cried Rolf, pointing his wand first at Luna, then at himself. Luna felt a strange impact, as if she were being wrapped in a thick layer of transparent rubber. The air around her head shimmered and thickened, forming a glimmering halo. The sounds changed. The hissing of the water vanished, replaced by a dull cotton wool hum, resembling the rush of blood in one's own ears. The green light on the door panel flashed. The outer hatch opened. Stepping out into the open ocean at such a depth was like stepping into space. The darkness was absolute, save for the beams of the bathyscaphe's spotlights, which now seemed like tiny beacons in an endless night. They swam out of the chamber, and Luna instantly felt the weight of the ocean. The spell worked, but it could not completely isolate one from the sensation that millions of tons of water hung above one's head. It was a feeling of one's own insignificance, smallness in the face of the elements. Before them towered the bone arch, and that same wall of silence. Up close it looked even more unnatural. It was not quite a substance, it was a distortion of space. The water there did not move. Even tiny particles of silt, entering the barrier's zone of influence, froze, like flies in amber. "Stay close," Rolf's voice rang out in her head. Now, underwater, they used a telepathic link charm, for the sound of a voice could not penetrate the barrier. His mental voice sounded clear, but tension was palpable within it. "I will go first. If the barrier starts to disintegrate my charms, I will give the signal. You return to the ship immediately." "We will go together," Luna answered mentally. She swam up to him and took his hand. Through the gloves she felt his fingers trembling. "It is easier for two to keep balance." Rolf wanted to object but remained silent. He only squeezed her palm tighter. They approached the grey veil. Rolf raised his wand, which glowed at the tip with a faint blue light. Lumos Solum would have been too bright here, and might have provoked aggression. And touched the barrier. The wand passed through it without resistance, as if through smoke. But the light at its tip instantly extinguished. "It absorbs light magic," thought Rolf. "Get ready, Luna. We are going in blind." They kicked their flippers and crossed the threshold. The world turned upside down. The first thing to vanish was the sensation of water. Inside the barrier, the liquid lost its viscosity. It became ethereal, weightless. But the most terrifying thing was the disappearance of sound. The telepathic link was severed. A ringing, empty silence reigned in Luna's head. It was not merely the absence of noise. It was an active silence. It tried to penetrate inside, to erase thoughts, to stop the internal monologue. Luna felt panic rising in her throat. She wanted to scream, simply to verify that she existed. But she knew it was a trap. If you start fighting silence with a scream, it will drink you to the dregs. She squeezed Rolf's hand. He flinched. She felt his fear through the touch. It was a vibration of muscles, a spasmodic rhythm. He was trying to wave his wand, create light, scan the space, but nothing worked. His science, his formulas, his logic, none of it made sense here. Luna closed her eyes. "I am here," she told herself. "I am the rhythm of my heart. Thump thump. Thump thump." She focused on the pulse in her wrist, where Rolf's hand gripped it. She began to transmit this rhythm to him. 1 squeeze, inhale. 2 squeezes, exhale. Gradually, Rolf calmed down. His chaotic movements ceased. He responded in kind, with a rhythmic squeeze of the hand. They created their own little metronome in a timeless world. Their eyes adjusted to the dark, and it turned out that the cave was not absolutely black. The walls of the cave were glowing, but it was not the light of moss or fungi. It was fossils. Enormous spirals of ancient ammonites embedded in the walls emitted a dim, ghostly violet glow. It was the memory of stone, a magical imprint of life that had existed here millions of years ago. In this ghostly light they saw the hall. It was not just a grotto, it was a cathedral. The vault rose upwards for tens of meters, lost in the shadows. The floor was covered in perfectly white sand, upon which there was not a single footprint, and in the center of the hall, on a raised elevation resembling an altar, lay it, the Ancient Leviathan. Rolf, seeing it, nearly let go of Luna's hand. In his head, which Luna could not hear but could sense, the word flashed, impossible. It was neither a squid nor a whale. It was a gigantic nautilus, the size of the Hogwarts Express. Its shell was a perfect spiral, woven of pure mother of pearl, which in this strange light seemed like liquid metal. But the shell was covered in cracks. From these cracks oozed a dark, viscous substance, the very same that formed the barrier of silence at the entrance. Tentacles protruded from the mouth of the shell. There were hundreds of them. They were thick, muscular, but now they lay on the sand listlessly, like fallen leaves. And amidst these tentacles one large eye, clouded by a film, was visible. It was closed. The creature was sleeping, but it was the sleep of the sick. Its body shuddered. Every time it took a breath, drawing water through its siphon, the cave trembled, and a new wave of silence rolled over Luna and Rolf, trying to knock them off their feet. They swam closer, hiding behind stone columns. Luna saw what Rolf likely did not. Around the Leviathan's shell hung an aura. It was ragged, grey, like old cobwebs. It was an aura of deep, all-consuming grief. It isn't sick, Luna realized. It is broken. It woke up and realized it is the last one, that its song is needed by no one anymore. Rolf pulled some instrument from his belt. A complex crystal on a chain. He tried to measure the creature's readings. The crystal in his hands began to turn black and crack. The Leviathan's magic was too thick, too archaic for modern instruments. Rolf looked at Luna in confusion, pointing at the crystal, then at the creature. His gesture meant, "What do we do? It is unstable." Luna gestured, "Wait." But waiting was impossible. The Leviathan's eye began to move beneath the film of its eyelid. It sensed them, not as physical objects, but as disturbances in its vacuum, as two tiny notes playing out of tune in its symphony of silence. Suddenly, an image appeared in Luna's head. It was not her memory. She saw a boundless ocean, but the sky above it was different. The stars were arranged in other constellations. She heard singing. It was a chorus of thousands of voices, brothers and sisters of this Leviathan. They sang, creating currents, controlling the tides. It was an architect's song that built the world. And then, silence. One by one, the voices faded, vanished, died, until only one remained, its own voice. And this voice sounded in the void, finding no response, finding no resonance. Its own echo began to drive it mad. Luna swayed. The image was so strong she nearly lost consciousness. She looked at Rolf. He was worse. Rolf Scamander, a man of science, was kneeling on the white sand, clutching his head. His eyes were wide open and staring at nothing. The silence had found a chink in his armor. It was showing him his own fears. Luna could not see his visions, but she could taste them. Bitterness, the taste of ink and old paper, the fear of never becoming as great as his grandfather. The fear that all his knowledge was merely dust. The fear that he had spent his life classifying life, but had never dared to live it. He began to tear the helmet of his protective suit off himself. "No!" Luna screamed soundlessly. She rushed to him, clinging to his arms, preventing him from breaking the magical seal. Rolf fought. He was strong, and in his state of panic his strength doubled. He looked at her but did not recognize her. In his eyes was the terror of a man drowning in his own head. "Rolf, look at me!" She pressed her helmet against his so their eyes were level. "You are not your grandfather, you are you. You are here. You are holding my hand." She could not speak, but she poured these thoughts into her gaze, into her touch. And suddenly, the Leviathan opened its eye. It was the eye not of an animal, but of an ancient god that had forgotten its name. It was enormous, the diameter of a dining table in the Great Hall at Hogwarts, glowing from within with a murky, pearlescent light that resembled a moon in the mist. The pupil was neither vertical nor round. It was a horizontal band, resembling the line of the horizon separating sky and sea. When the Leviathan's gaze fell upon them, Luna felt not a threat, but a gravitational pull. It was akin to staring into an abyss and feeling it drag you down. The creature did not view them as enemies. It saw them as an obstruction, as motes of dust in the eye, preventing it from returning to its saving slumber. Suddenly, the cave shuddered. It was not an earthquake. It was the Leviathan stirring. Its tentacles, which had lain listless until now, soared upwards, kicking up clouds of white sand. The water around them boiled soundlessly. And then, it screamed. In a world without sound, a scream manifests as a shockwave. Luna saw the space in front of the mollusk's beak distort, like hot air shimmering above asphalt. A transparent sphere of distorted water, charged with the pure magical energy of despair, hurtled towards them. "Protego!" Rolf instinctively tried to shout in his mind, but his consciousness was too fractured by panic. The shockwave slammed into them. It was like being struck by a velvet-wrapped hammer. They were not torn apart, but they were thrown back with such force that the water whistled, or was it an illusion, in their ears. Luna felt her back collide with one of the stone ammonite columns. The impact knocked the air from her lungs, and for a moment, multicolored circles danced before her eyes. The protective sphere of Protego Abysso flared and spiderwebbed with cracks, like glass struck by a stone, but it held. Rolf was less fortunate. He was thrown aside, into the darkness, away from the glowing walls. Luna saw him tumbling through the water, helpless as a rag doll. And in that moment, trying to grab hold of the void, he unclenched his fingers. His wand, elegant, made of walnut, slipped from his hand. Slowly, circling in the eddy of water, it began to fall downwards, into a crevice between the stones. "No!" Luna pushed off from the column, ignoring the pain in her back. She rushed to Rolf, who now hung suspended in the water, disoriented, clutching his hands to his helmet. He hadn't even noticed he had lost his only weapon. His eyes were closed, his lips moving in a soundless scream. The silence had breached his defenses. He was alone with his demons. Luna grabbed him by the shoulders and shook him hard. "Rolf, wake up!" Her mental voice was weak. The barrier of silence stifled telepathy. He didn't react. His face was twisted in pain. He was seeing something terrible. Perhaps he saw the ocean drying up, or all the creatures he loved turning to dust. The Leviathan, meanwhile, was preparing for a second scream. Its tentacles began to contract rhythmically, drawing in water. The shell began to vibrate, and this vibration transmitted through the water, making Luna's teeth chatter. It doesn't want to kill us, Luna realized with sudden clarity. It wants us to be silent. It wants everything to be silent, so it can hear its own rhythm, which it has lost. But a second strike could be fatal. The cracks on their protective spheres were already glowing a dangerous red. One more wave, and they would be crushed by the pressure of 200 meters of water. Luna looked at Rolf. Without a wand, he was helpless. She looked at her own wand. Light magic didn't work here. Combat magic would be pointless against a creature the size of a building, whose skin was harder than dragon scales. She needed something else. Something that could break through the silence. She remembered the words of Aroha, the Maori elder. Nature does not die quietly. Luna did what Rolf would have called madness. She tucked her wand into her sleeve. Then she pulled Rolf towards her, wrapped her arms around him, and pressed his helmet against hers so hard the glass creaked. "Listen," she commanded him, not telepathically, but through vibration. She began to hum. It wasn't a song, it was a rhythm. A simple, primitive rhythm of a heartbeat. Thump thump, thump thump. She beat her palm against his shoulder in time with this rhythm. She forced her body to vibrate. Rolf opened his eyes. Terror still lingered in them, but now there was surprise too. He felt the rhythm. It was the only thing real in this chaos. "Breathe," she whispered with her lips, and he read it. The Leviathan froze. It was about to release the second wave, but something stopped it. It sensed a new vibration. Not the chaotic noise of fear that Rolf had been broadcasting before, but a structured, calm rhythm generated by Luna. The horizon ice slowly turned in their direction. Now it was looking directly at Luna. She felt an alien consciousness touch her mind. It was like the touch of a cold, slippery hand. The creature was testing her, searching for fear, searching for aggression. But Luna Lovegood was a master of surprises. Instead of closing herself off with occlumency, she threw her mind wide open. "Hello," she thought, projecting the image of her garden in Ottery Street Catchpole, full of strange plants and sunlight. "You are very big. And you are very sad. I'm sorry we woke you." The Leviathan shuddered. The image of sun and warmth was alien to it, almost painful, but it was interesting. However, the silence had not gone anywhere. The creature was still suffering. It could not synchronize. Its internal clock was thrown off by centuries of sleep. It needed an external metronome. Luna realized that her heartbeat alone was not enough. She needed sound. Real, physical sound that would tear through this cotton wool. She glanced at Rolf. He was starting to come to his senses. His gaze fell upon his empty hand, then on the crevice in the rocks where his wand had vanished. "My wand!" She read the panic in his eyes. Luna shook her head. She let go of him, gesturing. "Stay here, don't move." She pushed off from him and swam forward. Straight towards the monster's maw. It was suicide. She was swimming into the zone of direct impact. The Leviathan could swallow her without even noticing, or crush her with a single movement of a tentacle. But Luna knew something about rhythm. When an orchestra falters, the conductor does not shout. The conductor makes a crisp, strong gesture to set a new tempo. She swam up to one of the giant ammonites embedded in the wall near the Leviathan's head. It was a fossilized shell, hollow inside, which was essentially a gigantic natural drum. Luna drew her wand. She wasn't going to cast spells, she was going to play. She swung her arm and struck the rim of the stone shell with the handle of her wand. In ordinary water, the sound would have been dull, but here, in the zone of silence, a physical strike on resonant stone acted like an explosion. Clang! The sound sliced through the water. It was pure, high-pitched, and incredibly loud. The barrier of silence trembled. The Leviathan recoiled, its tentacles convulsively contracting. It was painful for it, like bright light to eyes accustomed to darkness. It opened its mouth, a terrible black beak, and prepared to strike back, physically this time. One of the tentacles, thick as an oak trunk, whistled through the water, heading for Luna. Luna! Rolf, seeing this, forgot his fear. He pushed off from the bottom and threw himself in its path. Though without a wand, he could do nothing but serve as a living shield. But Luna did not flee. She struck the stone a second time. Clang! And then a third. Clang! She was setting a rhythm, steady, calm, persistent. 1, 2, 3. She was inviting it to a dance. Or a duel. The creature listened. For the first time in thousands of years, it heard something that was not the noise of chaos. It was structure. But then, disaster struck. The ammonite stone upon which Luna was beating could not withstand it. At the next strike, it cracked. A piece of the ancient shell broke off and fell, kicking up a cloud of silt. Luna's instrument was broken. The silence returned instantly, thicker than before. The Leviathan, deprived of its new focal point, panicked again. Its confusion instantly turned to rage. Now it intended to attack for real. When the ancient ammonite crumbled into smithereens, time in the cave seemed to stop for a fraction of a second. Luna watched the fragments of stone fall slowly, as if through thick syrup, kicking up silt. She saw the Leviathan's pupil narrow, transforming from a horizon into a thin, sharp line of rage. The silence returned instantly, and it was worse than ever before. It was not merely the absence of sound, it was a vacuum shock. It struck the ears, the lungs, the very consciousness. Luna felt a vessel in her nose burst, and a thin trickle of warm blood flowed over her lip, instantly dissolving in the water inside her helmet. The Leviathan waited no longer. It did not analyze, it acted instinctively, like a wounded animal cornered. Its beak opened wider, revealing rows of black plates resembling obsidian. It inhaled water with such force that Luna was dragged forward. She dug her fingers into the sand, but the current was relentless. Her feet lifted off the bottom. No! Rolf, who up to this moment had been merely an observer of his own terror, suddenly woke up. Perhaps it was a surge of adrenaline, or perhaps that same Scamander instinct to protect all living things, even if that living thing is trying to kill you. Or more likely, he simply could not allow Luna to die before his eyes. He had no wand, he had no weapon, but he had inertia. He pushed off the stone column with his legs, using all his muscular strength, enhanced by the magical suit. He flew not upwards, towards the exit, but downwards, to cut Luna off. He crashed into her a moment before she would have been sucked into the direct strike zone of the tentacle. The collision was harsh. Their protective protego-abyssospheres slammed into each other, emitting a shower of sparks, and merged into one deformed bubble. Rolf wrapped his arms around her, pressing her close, and used the inertia of his jump to alter their trajectory. They rolled across the white sand, tumbling like a tumbleweed, away from the enraged god, and in that moment, the Leviathan struck. It was not a sonic blow. It was a physical strike, with a tentacle of such force that it split the cave floor. Where Luna had stood a second ago, a fissure now gaped. The shockwave tossed them up like wood chips in a storm. They were thrown against the cave wall. Rolf managed to turn his back to the stone, taking the impact himself. Crack! Luna heard the sound even through the barrier of silence. It was the sound of a protective spell fracturing, the sphere around them spiderwebbed with cracks. Water began to seep inside, in drops for now, but the pressure of 200 atmospheres was already seeking a way to crush them. They fell into a small niche between two fossilized whale ribs embedded in the wall. It was the only place that offered any protection. Rolf was breathing heavily. His face was contorted with pain. The impact against the wall had not gone without consequence, even through the suit. But he did not let go of Luna. He pressed her against the rock, shielding her with his body, looking over his shoulder at what was happening in the hall. And hell was breaking loose there. The Leviathan was going mad. Having lost the rhythmic focal point, it was trying to destroy the source of its pain, which meant everything around it. Its tentacles thrashed against the columns, snapping age-old stalagmites like matchsticks. Debris rained down, kicking up clouds of turbidity. But most terrifying of all was that it began to sing its song of destruction. The water around it began to glow a dark violet. This was the visualization of sound waves of such intensity that they were tearing molecular bonds apart. It is going to explode. Rolf's thought rang out in Luna's head, clear and cold. The barrier of silence was so supersaturated with energy that it began to leak snippets of thought like an old radio receiver. It is gathering energy for a final release. The acoustic resonance will destroy the cave. And the reef above it. And us. Rolf turned his head to Luna. In the dim glow of the emergency lights, his eyes seemed like black abysses. "I'm sorry," he whispered with just his lips. "I lost my wand. I cannot repair the shield. It will hold for another minute, no more." Luna looked at him. Blood was flowing from his nose too. He looked defeated. His science had failed him. His magic had failed him. But Luna felt no defeat. She felt a strange calm. She gently extricated her hand from his embrace and touched his cheek. Her fingers were cold, but the touch was tender. "You did everything right, Rolf," she thought, looking into his eyes. "You protected. That is the most important magic. And now, let me do what I know how to do." She looked at the Leviathan. The creature froze in the center of the hall, pulsing with violet light. It was preparing to take a breath before the scream. Luna realized her mistake. She had tried to impose her rhythm upon it. She had beaten the stone, demanding attention. She had acted like a human, loudly, insistently. But one cannot argue with the ocean. One must agree with it. One must become water. The stone was too hard, she thought. Rhythm should not be a blow, it should be a pulse. She remembered her mother, Pandora Lovegood. She remembered evenings in their strange tower house when her mother experimented with spells. Her mother always hummed when she cast magic. She used to say, "Words are merely the frame, Luna." Melody is the soul of magic. Luna closed her eyes. She abandoned the attempt to block out the silence. She let it in. She allowed the void to fill her lungs, her heart, her thoughts. And in this void, she found a thin, silver thread of sound. Her own voice. She did not need air to sing in the mental space. But she needed a physical action to ground the magic. She removed her hand from Rolf's cheek and placed it on her chest, right over her heart. "Rolf," she addressed him without opening her eyes. "I need a conduit. My voice is too quiet for him. You are a Scamander. You know how resonance works. You know anatomy. Become my amplifier." Rolf didn't understand what she wanted to do, but he trusted her. Now, on the brink of death, he had no skepticism left. He placed his hand over hers on her chest. He felt her heart beating, calm, steady, despite the chaos around. The Leviathan began to contract. The light around it became blinding. The silence reached its apogee. It became so dense it began to press on their eyeballs. Rolf's protective dome gave a pitiful crack. Depressurization had begun. A jet of icy water sprayed into Rolf's face. There was no time left. Luna parted her lips. In the vacuum of silence, she could not emit a sound, but she poured all her will, all her love for this strange, terrible, broken world into a single note. She began to sing, not with her ears, but with her soul, and Rolf, feeling this vibration beneath his palm, did what he did best. He ceased to be a scientist analyzing. He became an instrument. He closed his eyes, focused on his magic, the kind that flowed in his blood without any wands, and channeled it into this sound. He became a resonator. At the moment the Leviathan opened its beak for the deadly scream, a song burst forth from the niche where two small humans were hiding. It was not a sound in the sense described by textbooks on magical physics. It was not a sound wave propagating through an elastic medium. It was the birth of a new dimension. When Luna parted her lips, no words escaped her throat. Instead, light appeared. But it was not the cold, electric light of spells, but a warm, living radiance, resembling liquid gold in which sunbeams had been dissolved. It was a melody, made visible. She sang of simple things. She sang of how water embraces stone without trying to crush it, of how the moon pulls the ocean towards itself and the ocean answers with the tide, of how loneliness is not emptiness, but a space for an echo, if you allow someone to hear you. And Rolf Scamander, a man who had believed all his life in numbers, classifications, and Latin names, became part of this song. He knelt, pressing his palm to Luna's chest, and felt a current pass through him, but it was not the destructive electric discharge with which he had wanted to strike the anemone. It was pure magic, wild, raw, primal. It flowed through his fingers, through his arms, pouring into his own magical core. He understood what he had to do. Luna was the source, a chaotic, beautiful, emotional torrent, and he had to become the banks for this river. He had to give this flow structure. Rolf closed his eyes and imagined a musical stave. He imagined the perfect architectural framework of a symphony. He took Luna's emotion and transformed it into vibration. He became a resonator, a living tuning fork that amplified every note, purified it of noise, and directed it exactly at the target. Their voices, one mental, the other magical, merged into a single beam of sound. This beam struck the Leviathan. The giant mollusk, which had already raised its tentacles for the deadly strike, froze. The song hit it not as a weapon, but as a cure. It penetrated through its armor, through layers of millennial silt, through hardened pain. It touched the very nerve that pulsed painfully in the silence. The Leviathan shuddered. Its horizon eye widened. It heard. For the first time in eons, it heard something that matched its own internal rhythm. It was not chaos, it was harmony. Luna and Rolf's song did not try to shout down its silence. It filled it. It wove into it, like a silver thread into black cloth. The violet light pulsing around the monster's beak began to change. The aggressive, poisonous hue began to lighten. It became lilac, then lavender, and finally flared with a pure, blinding mother of pearl, the color of the morning sky before sunrise. The Leviathan's tentacles slowly lowered. They were no longer weapons. They became like the petals of a gigantic flower opening to meet the sun, and then it answered. The Leviathan sang back. It was a sound of such low frequency that Luna and Rolf felt it not with their ears, but with their bones. Their ribs vibrated in unison. It was a foundation sound, a bass sound. A deep, thick hum that said, "I am here, I hear, I am." At the moment, the Leviathan's voice merged with the voice of the two humans. A physical change in reality occurred. The wall of silence blocking the cave entrance and absorbing the light cracked. It looked as if someone had smashed a giant mirror. The gray veil shattered into millions of sparkling shards, which instantly dissolved in the water. And the water rushed in, real, living ocean water. With its sounds, with its pressure, with its weight. "Rolf!" Luna's mental scream broke through the restored link. The protective dome around them, which was holding on by a wing and a prayer and Rolf's willpower, would not withstand a direct collision with the shockwave of the returning water. The cracks on the glass of their helmets split open. Jets of water struck them in the face, blinding them, choking their breath. They were drowning. At a depth of 200 meters, in the very heart of the underwater canyon, at the moment of their greatest triumph. Rolf instinctively pressed Luna to him, covering her head with his arms, though he understood it was futile. The pressure would crush them in a fraction of a second. But death did not come. Instead of pressure, they felt softness. One of the Leviathan's giant tentacles, which a second ago could have shattered rock, gently wrapped around them. Its surface was not slippery but rough and warm, like velvet. The creature created a cocoon around them. With its own magic, ancient and mighty, the Leviathan formed a protective sphere, far more perfect than any Protego charms. Inside this cocoon it was quiet and calm. The water receded. Luna opened her eyes and saw that they were suspended in the center of a pearlescent glow. She looked at Rolf. He was wet. Blood flowed from his nose. His hair was plastered to his forehead, but he was laughing. It was the nervous, hysterical, but happy laugh of a man who has just looked into the eyes of death and seen his own reflection there. "Are we alive?" he asked, and his voice sounded raspy, but it was a real sound. A physical sound. "We are not just alive," whispered Luna, wiping salt water from her eyes. "We are heard." She placed her palm on the inner wall of the tentacle, embracing them. "Thank you," she said. The Leviathan responded with a slight vibration. It began to rise. The giant creature pushed off from the cave floor. The stones shuddered. Sand billowed in a cloud. The Leviathan, who had slept here for thousands of years, was leaving its refuge. It swam upwards, towards the surface, carrying in its embrace two small beings who had returned its song to it. They swam out of the cave into the open canyon. And here Luna saw something that made her weep with beauty. The ocean was singing. The sound they had created below did not vanish. It spread like ripples on water. It rose upwards, reaching every corner of the reef. And where this sound wave passed, the world awoke. Dead grey corals flared with color. Blue, emerald, purple, gold. Colors returned as if someone had switched on the light in a dark room. Anemones opened, fish swam out of their hiding places. But most importantly, the sirens. They began to wake up. The sirens did not wake abruptly. It was reminiscent of flower buds blooming in time-lapse photography. When the Leviathan, now glowing with a soft pulsating light, swam past the suspended bodies, its vibration touched them. And this touch acted like a kiss of life. Luna, peering through the translucent wall of the protective tentacle cocoon, saw the young siren with the harp, the same one they had seen during the descent, shudder. Her eyes, clouded by catatonia, cleared. She inhaled the water deeply through her gills, and her tail made its first, tentative movement. She raised her head, saw the Ancient One swimming past, and was not afraid. On the contrary, an expression of awe appeared on her face. She raised the harp to her chest and ran her fingers across the strings. The sound of the harp wove into the Leviathan's hum. It was a high crystal note that perfectly complemented the giant's low bass. Behind her, another siren woke. Then, 3 more. Then, 10. It was a chain reaction of joy. As the Leviathan rose higher, leaving the Maui Trench behind, a trail of hundreds of silvery bodies already stretched behind it. The sirens surrounded it, circling its shell, touching its tentacles. They were singing. It was the song of the Silver Reef, but such as the world had not heard for thousands of years. It was not merely a melody to lure sailors or calm the waves. It was a hymn of return, a symphony of unity. Inside the cocoon, Rolf and Luna listened. The water around them vibrated with music. It was so beautiful it made one want to weep, and so powerful it seemed as if their bodies were dissolving into the sound. Rolf, who had lost his wand, lost his instruments, and nearly lost his life, watched this spectacle with wide eyes. His scientific mind tried to analyze it all, to break it down into frequencies and decibels, but his heart simply surrendered. He realized there are things that require no explanation, they require only a witness. "We did it," he whispered, though his voice was drowned out by the external music. He turned his head to Luna. She looked exhausted. Her skin was pale. Deep shadows lay under her eyes. The song spell had drained almost all her strength. She was barely holding on to consciousness, leaning on Rolf's shoulder, but her eyes shone as brightly as the reef around them. "No, Rolf," she answered, barely audibly, as if reading his thoughts. "We simply reminded them of the notes. But the music was always here." The Leviathan accelerated. The water around them grew lighter. They were approaching the surface. The darkness of night began to disperse, giving way to the gray, pre-dawn sky peering through the water column. Suddenly, the movement changed. The Leviathan stopped. Its tentacle cocoon gently unfurled. They were a few meters from the surface. Beside them bobbed the silver turtle, the bathyscaphe, which the Leviathan had evidently scooped up with another tentacle on the way up. understanding with its ancient mind that this was the shell of these strange little creatures. The Leviathan nudged them towards the bathyscaphe's hatch. It was a farewell. "Thank you," rang out in Luna's head. It was not a word. It was an image, a calm sea, a full moon, and the feeling of home. "Sleep well, Great One," she replied in her mind. "Your sleep will be light now." They managed to swim into the airlock of the turtle and seal the hatch a moment before the Protego Abysso finally wore off. The water pumped out with a roar. Rolf sank heavily onto the wet metal floor of the chamber, pulling off his helmet. He breathed as if he had just run a marathon. His hands trembled as he tried to undo the fastenings of his suit. Luna simply slid down the opposite wall. She closed her eyes and smiled a faint, blissful smile. The bathyscaphe swayed. They had breached the surface. Rolf stood up, swaying, and opened the inner hatch to the control cabin. Everything there was just as they had left it. Lights blinking, instruments ticking, smelling of peppermint and machine oil. But now, this technological world seemed strangely alien to Rolf. Small. Artificial. He pressed the ballast purge button, and the silver turtle rose above the waves, engaging its levitation engines. 10 minutes later, they were on the shore. They tumbled out of the bathyscaphe onto the black volcanic sand of Three Moons Bay, just as the first rays of the sun touched the water. It was a dawn the world had never seen. The sky burned with pink and gold. And the ocean. The ocean was singing. Even here, on the shore, the echo of the underwater symphony could be heard. The water sparkled as if a sack of diamonds had been spilled into it. Rolf fell onto the sand, spreading his arms. He felt the solid earth beneath his back, felt the cold morning wind on his wet face, and it was the best feeling in his life. Luna sat beside him, hugging her knees. Her wet robes had darkened, her hair hung in icicles, but she looked like a queen of the sea who had just returned to her domain. "My wand," Rolf said suddenly, looking at the sky. "It stayed down there. Walnut, phoenix feather core. Grandfather gave it to me for my 11th birthday." "It became part of the foundation," Luna said softly. "A good sacrifice for returning a voice to an entire ocean. I think Newt would understand. He would say I am a scatterbrain." Rolf chuckled, but there was no regret in his voice. "And then he would ask if I managed to get a sample of the Leviathan's mucus." He turned his head to Luna. "I didn't, Luna. I have no samples. No instrument recordings. They all went off the scale and burnt out. I have no proof. No one at the Confederation will believe what happened there. They will say it was a hallucination from nitrogen narcosis." "But is that important?" Luna turned to him. Her grey eyes were clear and deep. "Listen." She raised a finger. From the water came a sound. It was singing. Not the magical singing of sirens, but the ordinary, earthly song of whales returning to the bay. The cries of gulls. The sound of waves crashing against rocks with renewed vigor. "The reef is alive, Rolf. That is the only proof that matters." Rolf looked at her, and a strange, warm feeling was born in his chest, one that defied classification. He had always thought his ideal woman should be just like him, rational, organized, in love with facts. And now he was sitting on the wet sand next to a girl who wore radishes in her ears, though they were missing now, talked to shells, and believed in Nargles. And he realized that without her, he would be dead, literally and figuratively. "You," he coughed, searching for words. "You are incredible, Luna Lovegood. Your methods are complete chaos. Your logic is the absence of logic. But you are right, in everything." Luna laughed. It was a light, silvery laugh, reminiscent of tinkling bells. "Not in everything, Rolf. I still don't know why Raxperts love ears specifically. That is a mystery I haven't solved yet." She reached into her pocket, where lay the very same power shell she had found at the beginning of the night. She took it out and placed it on the sand between them. "Listen now." Rolf touched the shell. This time there was no pain. There was no piercing squeal of fear. The shell was warm. It vibrated quietly, soothingly. It was the sound of a sea that knows it is safe. "She isn't afraid anymore," Rolf stated. "No one is afraid anymore," Luna nodded. Suddenly, from the branch of a pohutakawa tree hanging over the beach, came an indignant squeak. A small green twig jumped down, ran across the sand, and scrambled up Luna's shoulder, clinging to her wet robes. "Barnaby," Luna stroked the bowtruckle. "Were you worried?" "I'm sorry. We were delayed a little. We were teaching a whale to sing." Rolf watched this reunion and smiled. For the first time in a week, his shoulders relaxed. The burden of responsibility, the fear of making a mistake, the fear of not living up to his grandfather's expectations. All of it remained down there in the depths, along with the old wand. He stood up, brushing off the sand, and held out a hand to Luna to help her rise. "You know, Lovegood," he said as her palm found his hand. "I have an expedition to the Andes next month. There is a valley where condors fly backwards, and the clouds taste of candy floss. The locals say it is a curse. I thought it was a gravity anomaly. But now I think I shall need a consultant on the impossible." Luna looked at him. The sun reflected in her eyes, and Rolf could have sworn he saw those same Raxperts she liked to talk about. "The Andes?" she asked. "I have always wanted to see fire lilies bloom in the snow, and I think Barnaby likes mountains." "Is that a yes?" asked Rolf, and his heart beat just as fast as it had back in the airlock. "It is a yes, Rolf Scamander," replied Luna, "but on one condition." "Which is?" "You will learn to hum like a bumblebee. It helps greatly to calm condors." Rolf laughed. "I shall practice. I promise." They stood on the shore, holding hands a little longer than politeness required. Before them lay the ocean, singing once more. Behind them rose the sun of a new day. And ahead lay a whole heap of mysteries the world had prepared, especially for two people who knew how to listen to it with different ears, yet heard the same music. And somewhere far below, in its cave, the ancient Leviathan closed its enormous eye and drifted into sleep. The peaceful, happy sleep of a creature who knows that when it wakes, it will no longer be alone.